Hello, hello. Welcome to Mondays with Tara and André. We're just about to start. Would love for you to let us know where you're joining us from today in the chat, and we'll start in just a minute. Hello, hello, André. Oops. I realized I forgot to unmute you. Whoops. I can't unmute. Oh, you have to unmute yourself, my love. I can't hear you.
Voila. Hello, everyone.
Hey, voila. Good morning. Good morning.
How are you?
Great. I didn't realize that when you mute yourself, the other person can't unmute you. So there you go. Now we learned.
And I thought you were all powerful.
I wish. Anyways, welcome everyone to Mondays with Tara and André. I'm Tara and I'm a relationship and awesomeness coach.
You certainly are. And I'm André. I'm a sex positive psychotherapist.
Yeah, awesome. So would love to know from people in the comments. Give us a thumbs up if you can hear us, or say yes and you can see us. We just want to make sure that we're live and working. It looks like we are, but who knows?
Who knows where it is?
Yeah, sometimes I wonder. So for those of you who are, what?
It's good to be curious.
For those who are new to watching us, we broadcast here live every week, always in our Let's Talk Polyamory private Facebook group, but sometimes in YouTube and other places. So if you're joining us from any of those places, make sure you join the group because that's where all the awesomeness comes.
It sure does.
Yeah. So André, we talk about all the things here: polyamory, open relationships, swinging. We've been doing this for over 5 years, and we've been supporting other people through this time as well. And so we've learned a lot over that time period.
We certainly have. But, as you say that, it makes me wonder, yes, we do talk about all these things, but I wonder what we don't talk about. I wonder what we don't speak about, the difficult conversations that we're agreeing not to have. Right?
Yeah.
Often there's a kind of nonverbal agreement that we don't even have to say it, but we both pick up on it. Well, let's not talk about that because it could open a can of worms, or it might be too heated, or whatever the reasoning is, and we simply avoid it. But I wonder at what cost? What happens when we don't? And if, say, for example, somebody wanted to talk about something that was difficult for them, what do they do with it when they don't talk about it? Do they simply internalize it? Does it become a resentment? Is it a breeding ground for a whole bunch of different feelings that may go unchecked, and maybe they're not actually as accurate or as valid? So really what we want to do is become aware of that and invite the others to have difficult conversations, to say everything.
That's awesome. That's totally true. You're always so good at segueing into the topic of the conversation.
Oh.
Yes, because we're going to cover some of these very things. So we're talking about how to shift from destructive, because, not communicating can be destructive, to effective communication for open relationship and polyamory success. That's today's topic.
Fantastic.
Yeah. So we'd love to know from people in the comments. I see some things are coming in. People are saying hello. If you had to rate your communication and how effective it is, how would you rate it? Like on a scale sort of 1 to 10. So if you're open to sharing that with us, communicating with us, so to speak.
Yeah, what a great question that really is, right? For us to reflect back, what kind of communicators do we imagine we are? But to that, I'd also want to know, how do we imagine other people would see us? Do they imagine us to be good communicators? And how do we see the others as well?
Yeah. I mean, I would say I think you're a pretty good communicator. I would put you close to the 8 to 10, depending on the day.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Wow.
But I probably put myself in the same spot, but I say it can sometimes drop to a lower number depending on the circumstances, which is, some of the things we also talk about often. Like sometimes there's certain things that impact our ability to communicate effectively, even if we are a good communicator or consider ourselves a good communicator.
Yeah, without putting on the spot, is there anything in particular that comes to mind? Because as you say that, what comes to mind for me is, I think I might be an okay communicator at times. I'm sort of trained in it, so I get that advantage. But in my personal relationships, I find that there are times when maybe I'm less of a great communicator. And what happens is I think sometimes I might start going into my own head about it, and I might start to anticipate, well, how is it going to land? How is this person going to receive it? Are they going to be open to it or not? And then I might already start to have this conversation in my head, which might not necessarily facilitate these expressions. Or I could also have the communication in my head and say, you know what, why don't I put it out there and let them be able to deal with it and see how they're going to react. And I can kind of take their temperature. I can gauge, I can see the response. But if I never announce it, then we'll just never really know.
Exactly.
So there are ways of addressing difficult issues, but doing it in a way that is considerate and is thoughtful of the other person, but at the same time, being true to how I feel about the subject.
Yeah, that's great. And we are going to talk about all those things. I think, for me, I feel like I'm the worst communicator when there's other factors influencing me. So we've talked about this before. You taught me this one: halt, hungry, angry, lonely, or tired. The other one that one of my clients added was annoyed. So they called it halta. So when I'm any of those things, I find I'm not in the right mental space to be able to be open to listening and that sort of thing. And we've had those situations come up for sure, where we've had to say, like, I think you've gently said to me, like, are you hungry? Or is there, like trying to find ways of identifying if there's something else that's influencing our ability to communicate.
Yeah, there was a great ad campaign that I'm sure many people have seen about that chocolate bar where, for example, the person was identified as, being the Hulk, I think it was, right?
Yes.
And their friend is like, why don't you have one of these chocolate bars? And then suddenly they return back to normal. So it highlights the idea that these outside forces might definitely influence how we are going to be in our communications. Will we be open? Will we be receptive? All of those things. So it's good to have that awareness and then be able to go beyond that.
The Hulk, yes. Okay, so people are putting some comments in the, in the chat. I see an 8 to 10. While people are doing that, if you want to add, what you think in terms of yours, I want to do a couple little quick announcements. The first is, people may have already seen this in the group, but we're going to be doing a talk on Polyamory 101 at Oasis Aqua Lounge this Friday at 10 p.m. So it's a Oasis Aqua Lounge, for people who don't know it, is a sex and lifestyle club here in Toronto, Ontario. And so they do this thing called Sex School, and we're going to be presenting in the ballroom at 10 p.m. What's cool is that when you buy a ticket, you get full access to the club and all the, the hot tub and the pool, outdoor pool, and all the space, plus our talk. So it's a great time to come and get an introduction to a swinger lifestyle club if you haven't been before, and then we'll be there to kind of support you in that. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so super excited about that. The other thing to share is we posted this in the group as well, but we now have our friend Polly, who's our chat bot, up and running. So if you don't want to miss this live and you want to make sure you get a reminder just before we go live, and the link to exactly where to join us, or to watch the replay. And if there's a worksheet that week, Polly will send that to you if you opt in to have her message you once a week. So the first little introduction, as you found, André, is a little bit, you have to do a couple steps, but once you're in, you'll just get the 2 messages a week, one with the link and then one with the link to the worksheet. And we do have a worksheet this week, which we'll tell you about. If you stay to the end, we'll give you the secret word.
How exciting.
So those are our little announcements. So, and I'll drop the link to Polly in the comments after we finish this live.
Yeah, let's jump in.
Yeah, so let's jump in. So many of you, or hopefully some of you, saw our Jealousy Freedom Masterclass. We had it January 2nd and January 9th. And we talked about how to master your jealousy. And the one slide that we showed, if you recall, I'm going to share it here. We were talking about sort of what works in terms of managing your jealousy, what doesn't work, and then these 4 areas of where you want to lean into in order to transform your jealousy into security. So these are the 4 key things that we identified. And of course, Not surprisingly, building and practicing effective communication is one of those things.
Yeah, it's really the foundation from which we will build our experience of this, right? People who first come into it, myself included, imagine that being in this lifestyle, swinging, E&M, all of this poly thing was going to be about sex and fun times, which a lot of it is. But really, I had no awareness to what degree it was about communication. And I wish I had known that previous. It would have really increased the satisfaction levels and would have decreased much of the hurt and misunderstanding part. So the communication part is it is the base. As I say, it is imperative that we get a good foundation, because it will influence how we're going to relate to others and how we're going to be received by them. So it's critical that we know this.
Yeah, it's totally foundation. People have probably heard me say this before, that the clients I've worked with, at the end, they're always like, you know what, this is really all about communication and various means of doing it, right? And if you master the communication, it's such a huge asset that you bring into all your relationships, even like your relationships with family and everything as well. I've completely transformed how I relate to my parents, for example, and what kind of stories I tell myself and the type of narrative and what how I choose the way to present how I feel. It's completely different. And as a result, it's changed a lot. And, I can't say enough about how amazing that has been. I don't know if people have had similar experiences.
But you're absolutely right. It's not just communication as a road to fornication. It is communication as a way of influencing all of our relationships, right? So what we'll learn in here is transferable. How are we going to have those difficult conversations, like you said, with people like our parents that maybe don't subscribe to the same values and benefits that we do? How are we going to be able to negotiate those?
Yeah, it's why it's the first module in our group program, Open Relationship and Polyamory Mastery. We just taught that module last week and had the people participate in, practicing our attunement communication method. It's pretty powerful. It's not easy to do. And it feels, I think, kind of awkward at first, but once you sort of master that, it's so great. Like you said, it moves into all the different areas of our life. So
yeah, absolutely. And to that point about it not being so easy initially, when we first come into this world of polyam, of E&M, there are many things that are first experiences, right? We might not have heard the term polycule or metamor, all these things. It's a kind of a language unto itself that you learn. And in the beginning, it might seem overwhelming, but in time, they are simply integrated as part of our vernacular. And the same thing is true of these communication patterns, these ways of doing like communication attunement, that we begin to practice them. And then in time, they will become integrated into our natural process, and we'll find ourselves being able to be much more fluid in it, be more comfortable in processing and speaking that way. And it will influence how we're going to be received and how we're going to invite.
yeah. So part of what we're presenting today is a little snippet of what's actually included in that module. But I think we're going to talk specifically about kind of practices that you might be engaging in that can be destructive in terms of how you communicate, and then those that you can shift towards to be effective. And, understanding what these are is a great first step, and that's what the worksheet has, like identifying which ones that you resonate with. So you'll make sure you want to get the worksheet and kind of work through these things. Because I think when you sort of look these things in the face and recognize them in yourself, it's a great first step in starting to learn how to do things differently. I mean, the next step is actually practicing and, having a method to do that. But this is a great first start. So we're going to start with destructive communication. So would love to know.
Well, I was just going to say, yeah, I mean, here it is, we spoke about having these difficult conversations, and maybe we don't want to talk about destructive communication, right? Why should we want to tune ourselves to the negative? But we become aware of it so that we can be mindful when we are speaking, and we can say, oh, you know what? I think I'm doing these things. I think I'm part of that. And we can then find better ways of communicating, ways that will add to the progression.
Yeah,
So,
I've definitely done probably all of these things in the past, in past relationships. So we'd love to know from you, if you're willing to share in the chat, if you recognize any of these patterns in yourself. So let's start with the first slide. So destructive communication. So you might be using the following techniques. Mind reading. So you were talking a bit about this just a moment ago, André.
Yeah, I certainly was, right? So I already get into this argument in my head and, mind reading, and then it makes me think right away about predicting, right? So I'm already speaking on behalf of the other person. I'm already assuming what it is that they're going to say. I'm reading their mind before they even tell me, and I'm predicting the outcome when in fact, I don't know these things to be true, right? And even if it has been my experience in the past, is there anything to say that they will influence or automatically dictate what the outcome is going to be in the present or in the future? So now I become more aware of it, and I say to myself, well, I'm already predicting how it's going to go before I even have invited them to have a conversation.
Exactly. And so, yeah, that's exactly the thing. And, when you're doing those things, you're not actively listening, which we're going to talk a bit more about in a minute. So some other things, you might be generalizing. So you might be sharing something with a partner and being very general about it and not, so it may be difficult for them to really understand what you're getting at because you're not giving an example. You're not sharing, what it really means, sort of the like, you always do X, Y, Z, that sort of thing.
Yeah, for sure. Putting people in groups, right? So we might say, well, women always do this, or penis owners always do that, or whatever the case might be. And we group people into that, and we get lost in the kind of the forest because we've grouped all these trees together without actually seeing the individual in that process.
Exactly. Distracting. So, trying to take the conversation somewhere else. So if you're the listener saying, oh, what about this thing? And then trying to go off in another direction because you don't want to deal with the situation head on. There's also kitchen sinking. That's my favorite one where you're just—
That's your favorite? Yeah.
Well, it's my most unfavorite thing, but I think it can be common when things get escalated or heated that people throw everything in the kitchen sink, like all past things, all things that are going on. And it's really hard to have a conversation where there's a bunch of different things that are thrown in together in one sort of communication.
Yeah, so I think it's also what we refer to at times as labeling, right? Layering, where we put more and more things into it. And what happens is it's very difficult then for us to start to unpack things because there's so many things going on all at the same time. Where do we start, right? So we really want to, when we are practicing the communication patterns that are healthier, we want to be able to invite the other person to explore these issues one thing at a time. Because when it is just layered, when there's too much kitchen sinking going on, we just don't know where to start. It's overwhelming.
Exactly. And then yes, butting. So the person who's listening is like already giving their, explanations or their reasoning and yes, but.
And then it goes into the next one of placating, right? So we might say, oh, it doesn't matter, whatever you want or whatever, or don't worry about me, it's okay. And we might minimize the idea that we're not necessarily okay with it, just at the price of keeping peace at any price, right? So we are letting go of our own true concerns about it, our own true desires, our own reservations about it, simply because we feel that if we were to protest, if we were to object, then it was going to not go out well, and we would be left to blame, where in fact it's not necessarily the case. So we come to find that we are able to express ourselves in healthier ways.
Exactly. Okay. There's still more. I kind of wish I had done this so it was a presentation so we're showing on the side because I can see your expression in the broadcast, but no one else can. But that's okay.
Well, that's all.
All right. So being judgmental. So judging what the other person is saying while they're saying it. Like, oh, well, they're just to this, or, they're just jealous, or, it's a way of sort of dismissing what someone might say.
Yeah, but it's interesting, Ed, when we say that, how we then find ourselves removed from the conversation. We've already put an end to it, right? We've passed a judgment. There's no more curiosity. There's no more exploration. We're not really finding out about it. We've simply made a judgment in order to remove ourselves or remove them. So what is going on that's causing that type of reaction? Can we look beyond that?
Sometimes that's really hard to see.
It is.
And it requires some help with that. Focusing on the negative. That's a very common one. So this is what shouldn't happen. I don't want this. I don't want that. Rather than sharing the types of things the positive things, like it would help me if you could do this, or it would help, or I would, using the I and me statements and focusing on how to, how you can change the thing that's maybe not working for you, if that's the type of conversation you're having.
Yeah, it's one thing to talk about these things in the theoretical, but not always so easy to implement in our practice. We give, we'll acknowledge that. But in focusing on the negative, for example, it's often said that if we do find fault with something, if we do see that something's not right, what can we do to be part of the solution or offer the solution? So, okay, I can acknowledge that I don't like this, but what could be a viable alternative? What could be another way of being about it, talking about it, looking at it, experiencing it?
Yeah, and making that offering as part of your communication.
But, in making that offering, it also, on another level, shows you my level of investment in wanting to find solution and wanting to mediate this so we can find satisfaction for both.
Yeah.
As opposed to just focusing on the negative and saying, well, it's just not possible, or I don't like it. That's it.
Yeah, that really is a really conversation stopper.
It can be.
Yeah. So, okay, pushing the other person's buttons. So we may know what our partners or whoever we're communicating with, what bugs them, and we want to get them riled up. Maybe we do want to get them riled up to sort of like justify our position or whatever it is.
You laugh at that one. I'm wondering, have you done that?
Oh, no, I was just trying to think of what my buttons are. Well, I think I know my buttons. I think my button is like, if I feel, but I don't think you would ever do it intentionally. It's my own reaction to something you might say. I might naturally take it as being critical, as we know. And so I apply my own filter on top of it based on my other experiences with, let's say, family members.
Right. So,
right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we all do that, right? We're going to have what's called the transference. So our past experiences may then find opportunities or find themselves in current relationships that have nothing to do with that person, but we simply transfer those feelings onto that person. So by having that dialogue, we can talk about that and become more self-aware of when we might be tempted to do that or when we're actually doing that. And then we're able to acknowledge that and then go to another position beyond that. So we're not limited to just doing that.
Yeah. So this is an important part of learning to be more effective in your communication, is really digging in and understanding what's behind what layering and what beliefs and that sort of thing are influencing how you're communicating. Because only by understanding them can you then do the next thing and understand like what you might be bringing to the conversation that maybe you're not aware of. And then, changing that or changing the dialogue, changing the narrative. It's stuff like we work with on people all the time. Okay. Where were we? When you don't listen and validate and you focus only on yourself. So you're not listening, you're not reflecting back what the person has to say, and you're really just focusing on how whatever is being said is on yourself.
Yeah, that's so interesting. So beyond any consideration of narcissism, what is it that's making me focus on myself? Am I feeling as though in some way my needs aren't being met, or that I am somehow not wanting to be present for the other person? So what's going on? What is driving those positions? And how could we acknowledge it, but then invite ourselves to come back to be present, to be active listeners, to be participant in the conversation?
Awesome. Complaining or blaming. So so complaining about something or blaming someone for something is basically like saying, this is all your fault, basically, or complaining about something without that idea of a solution. You could say, instead of complaining, what we'll talk about a bit is like sharing how you feel something impacted you, and what you might want to happen that's different, rather than just saying, you did this and you're wrong, or, this is all your fault.
Yeah. So what would be a way that we might then recognize the complaint, but how would we offer the solution? What would be an example of some way that the person might say it then?
well, we're going to get into that in a bit, but you can use how we, I and me statements and the nonviolent communication model. So what you observed, or what the situation was, what you felt, what you thought, what you need, and then what's the last one is the solution. What would you like to happen?
Right. So that's perfect. So in those examples, we're speaking about how it made me feel, how I thought about it, how I experienced it, rather than being accusatory and saying, well, you did this and you do that. And so that way, what happens is when we say you like that in those statements, those broad statements, it might very often make the person feel as though they are being accused, and then they'll automatically go on the defense. And very often when we are defended, we become aggressive. We become we go on the attack in order to defend ourselves. And that will bring the conversation, the communication, in a completely opposite direction that we're wanting to. But when I let you know how I felt about it, how it was affecting me, what my thoughts were, when I keep it focused on the I and me, then it will invite conversation without making the other person feel as though they have to defend their position.
Yeah. And it's hard when somebody who's not practicing communicating this way does that. I think, give to the example of family. This might be familiar to anyone, hands up in the comments, one of my family members always says, like, you did this, or, you think this, and or you never. And as soon as they do that, my previous reaction is to get my back up. But knowing that they're not aware of this practice, I try to reframe and say something like, I understand it feels like I might not be X, and then like, I would love to talk about it, or whatever, So sometimes our job as the communicator is to support people who aren't communicating well, which is super tricky too.
It's amazing because we're talking about how when we use those you statements, how we might sometimes get backed up and want to defend ourselves. And just hearing you, I don't even know the scenario, but just hearing the family members, some fictional or otherwise, family members say that you do this, you do that, it made me right away want to come to your defense, right? And I'm moved from it. So yeah, it definitely does have that invitation to back us up and make us somewhat aggressive. When we can realize it, we can say, you know what, I'm not going to bite. I'm not going to own into that. I know that they're coming from a place where maybe they're not as attuned to this different communication style, but I'm going to resist that, and I'm going to stay the course, and I'm going to invite them to unpack this, to explore it, to look at a different way of being. And then we have a shot of progressing that communication, as opposed to simply reinvesting in these harmful negative patterns that aren't working.
Yeah, I mean, it's not easy, trust me, like Christmas, lots of situations like that. But I mean, I feel good about it though. Like, I feel like, even if the other person's not doing the same level, I feel good in trying to reframe, and I think it's making a difference. So even if others don't implement these things, if you learn them and embed them into your being and try to understand, like you said, where someone else might be coming from and why they might be sharing that, then you can open up the dialogue and change that whole narrative. So
yeah, but it's wonderful, in this example, right? So you feel as though maybe your family didn't quite get it, but at least you come away knowing that you were able to do your best, and that you were aware of how the communication patterns were unfolding, and you did whatever you could do with them.
Yeah. I mean, it doesn't always work out, but it is a good feeling to make the attempt to try to change the narratives, because somebody has to, right? Somebody always has to.
Somebody's got to be the first, and somebody's got to be the last.
Yeah, sometimes. I mean, it's great if people can come together, like couples, when we work with couples and they work on this together, it's amazing. But sometimes if you're on your own, you have to do this work yourself and, teach others how to communicate better with you. So a couple of the other things under destructive, because we have one more destructive, and I feel like I want to get into the effective, insulting and attacking and threatening. Those are, pretty big ones.
They're pretty big. They can be actually quite dangerous, right? So we really have to find safer venues, safer ways of communicating. And there are certain things that are never going to be acceptable in our communication, and that is insulting, calling people names, attacking and threatening them is just not viable. So if you find yourself doing that, then you need to really find ways of addressing that to invite healthier communication, loving communication.
Yeah. I mean, it's not here, but related to threatening is also like ultimatums. Like sometimes threats come in the form of ultimatums. If you don't do this, then I'll do this. Yeah. Okay. The last set of destructive communication, pseudo listening and rehearsing your comeback. We probably talked a bit about these, but they're, usually you're pseudo listening when you're rehearsing your comeback.
Yeah, because you're no longer present, right? So you are already formulating the response. And while you're doing that, your mind is occupied on that. And you've no longer remained in the position of being present and attuned to what they're saying.
Exactly. Avoiding conflict to seek approval. So this is sort of the, whatever, or just listening and just not saying much as the listener. So you don't have to deal with the situation, which, we know works out super well. Interrupting, when the other person's sharing, giving them the space to, like, as a good listener, to allow them to share what they want. And then if you're the listener and you're sharing back, the sharer, not interrupting, stand off.
But I'm not interrupting, excuse me, but as the speaker, we also want to avoid those pitfalls that we mentioned earlier, like layering, right? Or being putting too many things in the mix all at one time. And then where does that leave the person? So we also have a responsibility as a speaker to offer digestible portions, right? So we don't want to unpack too much all at once, and then it leaves the person, is trying to take on a novel and be able to regurgitate it all in one shot. It's almost impossible. So we really want to be able to break it down and make it as digestible as possible. Bite-sized pieces.
Yeah, some of the things I've worked with people on is like finding a way when you notice your partner's layering to kind of flag that for them in a kind way. Like they've come up with like certain ways of, I can't remember the term, but it was a super cute term, and they'd be like, okay, so you're not interrupting, but you have a word or something that you say, we're doing this thing, right? And then restarting the conversation or stopping. So you're not layering.
It's so cute. Yeah. I mean, the idea of it being cute is wonderful, because if we can have a lightheartedness to it, if we can be playful with it, it kind of relieves some of the tension, right? So as you're speaking, maybe I kind of give you like, you're layering or whatever it might be, but some way that does it, that is a little bit lighthearted, because sometimes the subjects in themselves are rather heavy and kind of emotionally charged. So anything we can do to kind of cut that tension, but still remain present, is most welcome.
Yeah. And sometimes people do that kitchen sinking and layering, and because they feel like it's their only opportunity to be heard. So part of effective communication, I feel like we keep getting ahead, but that's okay. We'll speed through it when we get to it, is knowing and setting up ways within your relationship to come back to things. So you don't feel like you have to layer everything in order to feel heard. So knowing that there's times where you can, speak again. So like, let's deal with this one thing right now. And then I want to make sure you're heard, and then planning the next one.
Yeah. And to that point, you and I have even gone so far as to say that we should have regular business meetings, right? So we table it, even if there's no topic, if there's nothing pressing at the moment, we know that there's going to be a day coming up where we will have our a town hall meeting where we can say, well, how are things going? How are this, that, and the other things at this moment? This is an opportunity to voice those concerns, to voice those things. And it seems, I guess, kind of contrived in the beginning, and yet it seems to be a rather valuable asset for us at times when we are able to talk about certain things that, how do you just introduce it out of the blue? And something like a business meeting, something like the state of our affairs, is that opportunity. So if you feel as though those things are too few, those opportunities are too few, and that's why you are stacking all these things, putting all these things all at once, this might be a viable approach for you to consider as well.
Yeah, exactly. That's, that's like actually module 7 of our program is setting up your relationship review. So setting up how often it's going to be, what are the things you're going to cover? And we definitely have suggestions on the types of things you can do as part of that. So knowing that that's ahead is one way of dealing with bigger issues, but that's not to say that you don't deal with things as they come up, because pushing things down never works. So I think we covered a lot of these things. So maintaining your own position and playing the win and lose game, being vague, rude or impolite, and then airing old resentments. That goes with a bit of layering. Sometimes like, well, you did this thing and you keep, and keep bringing up things that maybe you've already talked about and resolved. It's like you keep them on the, one of my clients was talking about keeping them in a jar on the shelf so you could like throw them when you needed them as ammunition. And it was quite interesting when they realized that they were doing that. Why am I keeping these on the shelf? Why do I need these for ammunition?
Yeah, that's a great question, right? So what is it, what purpose is it serving to have these in there? Why do I feel the need to hold on to these past resentments? And, you talk about that they might have been resolved, but apparently not to that person's satisfaction if they're holding on to them and there's still a resentment.
Yeah, so part of the work.
Right, and that becomes part of our next part about effective communication. So if we still feel as though we've had resentments that are lingering, it then seems to indicate that we've not been so effective yet in airing all of those things and communicating them. So maybe we can speak a little bit about the effective communication.
Yeah, I was just going to say one of the things we did was when they realized they were holding those things in jars on the shelf, we talked about how they might go and start opening them and airing them out. And what are those things in the jars? What about them is still unresolved? And how can we work through those? It was like a great exercise. It's amazing when you realize what jars you are holding on to.
No doubt. And, speaking to the resentments, and this will segue into the next part of effective communication. If we're holding on to those resentments, are we doing it because we feel as though we've not been vindicated, that we've not been heard? Are we feeling as though we are still the victim and we need to hold on to this because it's not been satisfied yet, right? So when we did share it, did we feel that there was a sense of empathy? Did we feel as though the other person got us and really understood what it was we were trying to communicate? And when we do feel that, there is something that happens, a phenomenon that happens, that it does change the way we are holding on to this. It does change how we feel about it because we feel as though someone has heard us. It has been seen, it has been witnessed, and it can change it entirely. So it is about being empathetic and how if we feel as we're not necessarily empathetic by nature, there are certain things we can do to increase our level of empathy.
Great. So that was a great segue into effective communication. So being empathetic and validating the other person's thoughts and feelings. So this doesn't necessarily mean we have to agree with them, but empathy is showing how much compassion and understanding we can give them. So it's different than sympathy, because sympathy is more about pity for something, or you don't want that thing. That's sympathy. Whereas empathy is more of the understanding part.
Right. Yeah, it goes back to conveying that feeling that they are seen and understood, being present for them.
Yes. So part of, effective communication is listening to and reflecting or paraphrase what the other said to ensure understanding. And that's part of our attunement communication process.
Right. And to that, we would give clear and honest and immediate feedback without using destructive communication practices, as it says.
Yeah. So if somebody shared something with you and you were, as a listener, saying, well, I believe I heard you say this, the person who was shared, like, oh my God, you got that you got that completely wrong. You always get it wrong. You never listen to me. Right. That's going to, even if you started the process off right, that will stop the communication in its tracks. So saying, actually, what I was trying to say was this. Does that make sense to you? Or whatever.
Yeah. And hopefully they're not saying you always feel, or you always say, or you always do. Right.
Yes.
So we want to avoid using the you, and we want to avoid big blanketing statements like always and never. So what we might say is, often when this happens, it makes me feel this way. Or when it happens, I thought that this was what was going on. So we want to prevent ourselves from using polarizing statements or things that are going to make people feel as though they're on the outside of it.
Exactly. So we already talked about feedback. So sharing your thoughts and your feelings. So sometimes, and this is, there's debate about this in terms of the model for nonviolent communication, because they say you should focus on feelings because, thoughts might not be factual, but sometimes I feel it's good to understand what it might be that you were thinking. Like when this happened, the story I was telling myself was this, which made me feel this. Like, I feel that's a more complete explanation, because then the other person understands where we came up with that feeling. Like, what were we applying onto that feeling? I mean, that's my belief anyways.
But it's also been my experience when working with certain people that it's not so very easy for them to identify their feelings, but they are able to share their thoughts. So there's no absolute right or wrong way to do this.
Yeah.
But really, what is consistent in either of those is the idea that we try to say everything. We try to be open in our communication.
Exactly. And we already talked about the last one on that, which was staying focused on one thing or at a time and making sure you're working through that. So as the listener, asking clarifying questions to ensure understanding. So as the listener, you might say, are you trying to tell me that, or is what you were feeling this, or is this what you want, or is this what you need? Can you help me understand it?
Mm-hmm. And then that goes into the next part about trying to remain open-minded and reserving judgment, right? So we try not to be so judgmental, but when we do pass judgment, we might be aware that when we're passing that judgment, we've stopped being curious about it. We've already levied our judgment, but also how often are we able to resist passing judgment in appreciating where the other person might be coming from as well? Do we know what is in their position? What's creating their stance? And if we have somewhat of an understanding of that, it might help us in being less judgmental about where they're coming from, what we're hearing from them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you said, we said it when we were doing our training last week. Our module 1 training is like putting yourself in the other person's shoes, and also imagining how you might receive that message.
Right. Right. Yes, because we would want them to consider where we're coming from. We'd want them to know of our past traumas, hurts, influences, schooling, whatever it might be that leads us to our position. Well, we should then grant and offer them the same consideration. It makes it easier for us as well, because if we see somebody who we're wanting to pass judgment and not want to hear from them, we might simply go away and want to dismiss them. Whereas when we have an understanding, it might help us to understand where they're coming from, what makes them be there, and how are we going to go forward with that?
Okay. So assertive, not aggressive messages. So in this, we're saying being very clear. And, sometimes we have to be strong about how we feel. Like we need to stand up for ourselves and be assertive in sharing our thoughts and feelings, but not in an aggressive way. And I think we talked a bit about that already.
Yeah, by all means, we do want to be self-advocating. We do need to be able to stand up for ourselves and let it be known what we're wanting and what we're not wanting, but it's in the way that it's delivered, right? It needn't be aggressive. We can be aware of the level of aggression and yet still temper it in being fully assertive and being self-advocating.
So I was going to say the next one, which is being aware of nonverbal communication. So your tone, the way you're standing, like, am I feeling like someone's really listening to me if they're crossing their arms, all those things, eye movements, eye contact, those things are all important if you can. Like sometimes it's hard to have eye contact when you're having hard conversations, but, being aware that you might be giving some nonverbal cues as the sharer and the listener.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a two-way street, right? So when I'm speaking to you, what is my communication to you, my nonverbal communication? Am I open? Am I threatening? Am I loving? Am I judgmental? I mean, where is all of that going to go? Just as we receive all that information from the other person, right? So be aware of how you're communicating. Can you remain open even in these most difficult, taxing conversations? Can you give the appearance, can you give the feeling that you are receptive, that they are able to speak to you about these things?
So the last one on the other slide was to think before you speak. So being aware of how you're saying it, and we've, shared some of those tips, sort of thing.
To that one, I think it's a wonderful thing to keep in mind, to think before you speak. How would I like to hear this? How would I feel if they said the same thing to me the way I just said it? Right? So don't speak to people the way you would not want to be spoken to. Speak to them in ways that you'd want to hear this thing coming across.
Yeah, exactly.
It seems obvious, and yet very often, and I'll be the first to admit I do it as well, we sometimes forget that, right? So be mindful of how you're opening up these dialogues, how you're sharing.
It's why we practice this in our program, and when we work with people, it's about practicing. Like, do it right in front of us, and it's not easy, and we sort of helped the people we're working with, like, actually work through a specific scenarios that they were sort of dealing with, some things that they wanted to talk about, and having to stop and say, okay, this is, you could share it this way, and then just kind of working through that conversation. It's much harder than it seems.
Initially, but as we practice it, like other things, it becomes easier and easier as we become more acquainted with it.
Of course. Well, that's the point, right, of practicing. So calling stop action or some sort of other term, phrase when things are escalating. So you're having a conversation, you feel like things are, going in the direction where you're no longer implementing effective communication, having something that allows you to stop it in the moment and then be able to pick it up at another time. So that's the important part, is being open to picking it up another time and setting a time for that. So someone's like, I feel like we're not communicating very well. Can we pick up this conversation in an hour? I need a minute. I mean, you do this to me all the time. I'm not always as receptive to it because I'm like, I want to deal with it, but we do that, and it is effective.
Right. So you're absolutely correct. Yeah. It makes me think of the red, green, and yellow, right? That we're able to communicate that in certain play areas. Well, we can do the same thing in our communication. So we're talking about something that's difficult, and all of a sudden, maybe we're not subscribing to all these healthy ways of communicating. We fall back, and all of a sudden it becomes a little bit heated. We're uncomfortable with it. We're just tapped out. We've been talking about it for a while. And one of us might say, well, let's take a break. And we have an agreement to take a break, but it doesn't mean that we're not going to return. It means that we're going to take a break and come back to it at sometime in the near future. But we do it because it also makes us feel safe enough to say, hey, I'm feeling heated. I don't want to feel overactivated. I do want to talk about this, but right now I just need a little bit of a pause. And as that other participant, we acknowledge that and say, okay, well, let's pause, but we will come back to this.
Yeah, and it's hard when you're in the heat of the moment. But the thing is, because people are like, I just want to talk it out. I just want to resolve it. But then as it continues to escalate and as the conversation continues, if it's not progressing, then you actually get into some of those other things. You get tired, you get frustrated, all those things, but then it's going to make things even worse. So it's important to remember that it's actually better to come back to it. I also need to remind myself of that.
Yeah. But Tara, to that point, so sometimes what happens is we come back to it and then we end up doing the same things over and over again. And now we've sort of entered into this communication loop where we keep, I'm defending my position, you're defending your position, and nothing much is changing. We're not really going past it, even though we have the willingness to enter into the ring together. So what we need to do then is find ways of having progressive communication. Mm-hmm. How can we look at it from a different angle? How can we ask that question in a different way? How can we announce our position in a different way that might lead to another perspective beyond what we have? The progressive communication is very important.
Yeah, I think if I could say anything about what I've heard from people who are coming into the group and people that I talk to, is sometimes it feels like when they're starting in non-monogamy that all they're doing is having the same conversation, and it just keeps going and going. They're like, all we're doing is talking and we can't seem to get to the next thing. And then they, often people are like, I'm just going to give up. We just can't do this, because it just seems like they can't get past a certain thing, so.
But there are ways of getting past it. There are ways of more effective communication.
Of course. Mm-hmm. All right, where were we? We're in this one. Stay committed to positive communication, even if upset, angry, or frustrated. So that's knowing when you need to, it's related, knowing when you need to stop, but also trying to remain positive, because things are hard. but remembering that, positive communication is going to get you to that next thing. And so we've mentioned nonviolent communication. That's a model that's out there that people have probably heard of. I'm not sure if people have heard. Let us know in the comments. But basically, it's about, it's a 4-stage process where you, like a series, like how you form your statement. So basically, what you're observing, what you're feeling and your thoughts, what your needs are, and then having a request. So this gets to the, like, what do I need out of this? So that's the next thing. So the person's not, it gets rid of the generalization. It gets people to help, to be more understanding of what it is you're trying to communicate and what it is you want.
Right.
And then all of these things that we talked about in terms of like the effective communication all implement our attunement communication process, which is something we teach and we strongly believe in. I'm just gonna think, okay.
Yeah, fantastic.
Yeah. So that was a lot, but I think, and communication is so important. And, I've seen how it can significantly shift how people relate to their partners. And it can really open up things to all the experiences I think that people imagine when they first open up. When you get stuck in a conversation or a situation of jealousy or insecurity or trying to set up agreements and stuff, it is the key to getting through that and moving on to the next step, to the pleasure, which is, what we want.
It's funny, as you said, it makes me think about, we say that we're in an open relation, but really we're open communicators.
Exactly. Yeah, that's what people always say is, polyamory is just about communication. And it's true, but it's definitely one of the side benefits for me is I became a better communicator, and I love that. And it's also, the key to getting close too, like building the connection, like being able to talk to your partners is such an amazing way. Like our communication is such an amazing way for us to stay connected and know that we have that secure attachment and we are the safe haven and the secure base for the other. And like communication always seems to be the key to that thing.
Yeah, without a doubt, being able to communicate openly, it creates a greater position of honesty and a greater position of security, unlike any other I've known before.
Exactly.
Fantastic.
So, yay. So we said to stick to the end to give you the secret word, which is communication. That seems obvious as a secret word. If you drop that in the comments, I'll make sure that you get the worksheet for this week. So it has all the stuff that we talked about. So you can start circling and identifying the types of communication patterns that you might be having, and then also the ones that you want to start implementing. So it's a great little cheat sheet for you to get started on that. But if you sign up for Polly, the bot, she'll always deliver it to you. If we have a worksheet for the week, they'll always deliver it to you. I made a mistake there.
Well, they do present as looking rather feminine, but yes, they will send it to you.
Yes. And if you are having trouble with your communication with your partner or any other issue and you want to talk to us, we do offer a what we call our relationship rescue call. So it's 45 minutes. It's complimentary. We can talk about what's going on in your relationship, where you might not be communicating well, and where you want to be. And we'll make sure we set you up with an action plan of next steps that you can do either on your own or with our support. But we love talking to people. We love helping people. And yeah, that's why we do this every week.
Yep.
Amazing. Well,
Amazing.
André, have a great Monday. I will see you Friday. I guess that's our last little thing. Friday for our Polyamory 101 talk at Oasis. I'm super excited. If people are coming, please, if you're going to be at Oasis, come say hello to us. We'd love to see you and see some of our people.
Yeah.
It's going to be great.
Looking forward to it.
Awesome. Okay, everyone. Have a great Monday. And if you missed any of today's, watch the replay. It'll be in the group.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks, babe.